Hello guys, welcome back to another video in Java tutorial series. In this video, I wanted to discuss data types in Java. In last video, we discussed about classes and objects, and I think in order to take a next small step, data types in Java will be an appropriate step to take forward, right? So let's take a look. Alright, so data types in Java are basically divided into two categories, primitive data types, as you can see on line number 5, and non-primitive data types. This is going to be a little theoretical in the beginning, but this is an important step to kind of talk about first, then we'll jump into the coding section, right? And we don't need to remember that, right? But it's a good refresher. So primitive data types are basically, there are 8 of them. Start with byte, short, int, long, boolean, char, float, and double, right? The idea is every one of these data type has a range. So if you are using a byte data type, you can only store integers from -128 to 127. Short has a different range, start with minus 32,768, goes all the way to positive 32,767. As we are going, in the list, down the list, we can see the range is increasing, and long is further, longer than integer. And now boolean, as name suggests, it's going to be either true or false, right? A character is going to be like single letter, so if we want to store letter A, letter B, or any letter, we can store in character, called char or char, however you want to pronounce it. Float has whenever we want to store decimal points, we can use float or double. I think the only difference between float and double is with float you can have precision after 7 to 8 digits after the decimal points, and double has like double the number of that. So double has 8 around 16 precision after the decimal point. I guess that's why it calls the double. It's called double because you can actually store double amount of precision point after the decimal, right? So pretty straightforward. And as I said before, we really don't need to remember that is what is the range of short, what is the range of, when we coding, it's we mostly going to use integer and long because that's where our most of the integer falls into this range anyways, right? And boolean is going to be widely used because that is the only data type for storing true and false, and we're going to use, normally in a practical scenario we use boolean a lot, right? Yes, same with char and float at double, right? And then we come to a different category, next category called non-primitive data types, which is like class. Whenever we create a class, that's a non-primitive data type. Whenever we create an interface, that's a non-primitive data type. A string, array, etc., etc. Now we're done with the theoretical part, and let's jump into the core and let's see why we need data types on the first place. So I'm going to go to IntelliJ quickly. That's where my notes are, so I'm going to delete them. Okay, so let's take a look at the example. This is the example that we created in our last video of classes and objects video. And you can see we have a class named video, and then it has a title and a description, and there are two methods that we discussed in the last video. So let's take a look at this example, right? In order to create a video, we have to define a type of it. So we said it's a class type, right? I mean, I think Java needs to know whatever you're defining, what is the type of it, right? So when we came inside the video, we said okay, we want a title for it and a description for it, right? And then we have to tell Java that how is our title going to look like. Is it going to be string, it's going to be an integer, or it's going to be character or a boolean? And we know title is normally a string, right? A title is a big text, so we said okay, it's going to be string. Similarly, we said a description is going to be a string, so we need to predefine the type, right? So for example, I say duration, right? Let's say duration, my video, how long is my video going to be? So I say I create a field called duration, a property called duration rather, and now I know it cannot be a string, right? Because duration is normally a 10-minute time limit, right? So say 10, 20, 30, it's going to be like that, right? So it's not, cannot be a string, it cannot be a char, it cannot be boolean. The appropriate thing could be an integer, right? So we can say duration is going to be an int. So if I remove int, you see the IntelliJ has a red line here with the bulb here saying it was complaining about it, didn't like it, right? Because Java is saying I don't know what is the type of duration, right? So it's an error at this point. So we have to say, this is an integer. The error just went away, right? So that's why we need to define a type in front of the property or anything for that matter, right? Similarly, if I remove the class here, then Java won't recognize what is this, right? What type of video it is. So we say, okay, it's a class, right? So we define a non-primitive type here. So that is the idea. That's why we need to need data types in Java, so we can define our types upfront. Um, let's want to see what else we can do. I guess we can play with how we can how we can like assign a value to it, right? So for example, the string here is title, so we can say string title equals to, now how should I assign a string? So string is always start with double quotes, and then we'll say sample title, right? So now title's value is sample title, and description is, we can say sample description, right? So now we have a now we have a way to assign a string. So you can see a string is always assigned start with a double quote, ends with a double quote, and then you put your text in between, right? If I do something else, for example, if I do, let's say, if I put a number here, then you'll see again a red bulb came in, and then the red underline here saying change field description type to int, because you just assign an integer to a string. That's not correct. So we'll put our description back, and then IntelliJ will stop complaining. In here we can say, we can type an int because duration is an integer. But if I do something else, for example a string, then IntelliJ will start complaining, say change integer, change duration to a string, right? I know it's not a string, I want it as integer, so I'll keep it like that. Now similarly, let's create a boolean value, and let's say published, and then we'll say is it published or not. Yeah, so it's more a yes or no type of a thing. So we'll say false. So that's how we create a boolean. We just simply say false or true, and then Java likes it. We don't need to put a quotes around true or false, we just simply say false or true, right? Okay, what else we can talk? We can talk about character data type. So we'll say char, and we'll say letter, and then we need a single quote for that, and we'll say a, right? Let's try putting a double quote, and let's see what happens. Again it'll say change letter to string, because double quote are for string, so we'll change it back to char. All right, so we looked at different data types now, and let's see if we have something else. Char, float, double, long. So for long, we can, it's mostly going to be just like integer. I'll just put value here, and I'll just say, if I just say 5, then it'll be like, okay, I'll take 5, because the range is long is only dedicated for longer numbers, right? So if something that has a potential to have a longer number, longer integer, then we should use long for that. So like bigger number like this can be stored. Let's see what's the error. It says integer number is too large. Still doesn't like it. Integer number is too large. Okay, so we probably can store all these number in long. Let's see if we can store the same number in integer. Oh, I know what it is. If we are storing a big number like that, we need to say capital L at the end. Maybe still too large for long. Okay, so that's good. And now if I try to store the same thing in integer, let's see what does it say. Now you can see, well, I should remove L because L is for long. It says integer number too large, right? So if there is a large number that you cannot store in integer, you can use that and store in long, and just put a suffix capital L at the end, so it will be, it'll be recognized as a long. So that is long for us. I'll just put the smaller number back. And then for float, we can say I'll say f, and then we can just say 2.50, something like that, right? It's a floating point number. It says cast to float. Let's say use that. So we need to put capital F at the end for float, so it will be recognized as a float. And for double, I don't think we need to put anything at the end. We'll just say 2.25, and then it'll be recognized as a double. We don't need to put capital D or anything like that. So by default, any decimal point will be taken as a double. Okay, so that's pretty much it. We talked about classes already, string already, array we can cover in the next lecture, but actually let's do that right now. So for array, we're going to talk more about it because it's part of collection. But if you have to create an array, so for example, I want my collection to have a bunch of things, right? So like I want my collection to have like 5 integer, right? So I want it to have 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. 5 of these value I want to store all together. I want a collection for that, right? I can use an array. So since all of these are integer, I can create an array. The way to create an array is you say integer, and then you put brackets around that, and then you can say new int, and then you can say I am going to have 5 numbers in it, right? The size of it is 5, and then you obviously need to define and to type a name for that, right? So you'll say my collection, or whatever name you like, it doesn't really matter. So the same thing, we created a type first, and then we named the type, right? And this is how we like instantiate it. Let's take a look another way of how can we create an array. So we can also do integer, and then when we can say new collection, new array, whatever name we want, and then we can say new int, and then right here we can actually define the items we want inside array. So we can say 5, 10, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, right? So that way now our array has all the items in it, right? So we created an array, we instantiated it, and we also defined the items in it. So that's another way of creating an array. Alright guys, so that's it for this video. In this video we discussed initially theory about different data types in Java. We classified into two different types, primitive and non-primitive, and then we took a look at how we can use that inside our code base. Alright, so stay tuned for that. We're going to use a lot of them inside in our next coming videos. So stay tuned for videos like that. Thank you.